Gabriel didn't tolerate lateness. In his world, a minute delayed was a sign of disrespect, or worse, a setup. When the heavy mahogany doors finally pushed open, he dropped his cigar into the ashtray, fully prepared to end whatever arrangement she was bringing to the table. But the sharp words died in his throat. Harper stood in the doorway, clutching the frame, her knuckles white. She whispered, "Sorry I'm late," trying for a casual smile. Then Gabriel looked down and saw the trail of crimson staining his floor. Gabriel checked his watch. The dial read 9:14 p.m., 14 minutes. Outside, the Chicago rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of his private office, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon yellow and bruised purple. The rhythm of the storm was usually calming, a white noise that drowned out the endless calculations running through his head. Tonight, it just grated on his nerves. He didn't like waiting. He especially didn't like waiting for civilians. Harper Quinn was exactly that, a civilian. She was a forensic accountant who had poked her nose too deep into the logistics company Gabriel used to wash his cash. 2 weeks ago, she had marched into this very office, terrified but vibrating with a stubborn, reckless energy, and laid a manila folder on his desk. She hadn't come to blackmail him. She had come to trade. Her brother, a degenerate gambler with a penchant for bad bets, owed $250,000 to the Russo syndicate. Harper had offered to fix the glaring vulnerabilities in Gabriel's books, vulnerabilities that the feds were currently sniffing around if Gabriel bought her brother's debt. It was a cold, pragmatic deal. Gabriel respected pragmatism. He had agreed. Tonight was supposed to be the final handover. She was bringing the encrypted drive with the restructured accounts. She had insisted on 9 p.m. At 9:15 p.m., Gabriel poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon. His mind automatically cataloged the possibilities. She had gotten cold feet. She had gone to the FBI. She had decided to run. He took a slow sip, the amber liquid burning a familiar, comforting path down his throat. If she ran, he would have to find her. If she talked, he would have to silence her. It was business. It was the life. He felt a fleeting annoyance that she had chosen the stupid route. He had actually liked her dry wit. The brass clock on his desk ticked. 9:16 p.m. Gabriel stood up, adjusting the cuffs of his dark gray suit. He reached for the encrypted phone on his desk to make the call that would set his men loose on the city. His finger hovered over the dial pad. The heavy mahogany doors at the end of the room creaked open. Gabriel's hand dropped. His jaw tightened. He turned, the reprimand already formed on his tongue, ready to strip away whatever excuse she had prepared. Harper stood in the doorway. She didn't step inside. She simply leaned against the heavy wooden frame, her left hand gripping the brass handle so hard her skin looked translucent. Her trench coat, usually a crisp, obnoxiously bright beige, was soaked through, plastered to her frame in heavy dark patches. Her hair hung in wet, tangled rat tails around her face. She looked up at him. Her face was paper white, save for a blooming, ugly, purplish bruise swelling along her right cheekbone. Her chest heaved with shallow, erratic breaths. She forced the corners of her mouth up into something that roughly resembled a smile. "Sorry I'm late," she whispered. Her voice was thin. It sounded like dry leaves scraping against pavement. Gabriel's irritation vanished, replaced instantly by the cold, hyper-focused clarity that had kept him alive for 34 years. He didn't speak. His eyes scanned her, dropping from her bruised face, past the soaked coat, down to the floor. She wasn't just wet from the rain. A steady, thick drop of dark red fell from the hem of her coat, hitting the polished hardwood floor with a soft, wet smack. Then another. There was a smear of crimson dragging across the marble threshold behind her. A jagged trail that told him exactly how hard she had fought just to make it down the hall. Then, the Mafia boss noticed she could barely walk. Her right leg was completely unweighted. The toe of her boot rested lightly on the floor, but her knee was trembling violently, refusing to lock. The moment she let go of the door handle to take a step toward him, her center of gravity gave out. She didn't scream. She didn't even gasp. She just dropped. Gabriel moved. He crossed the 20 feet of the spacious office in seconds, sliding to his knees just in time to catch her before her head cracked against the corner of the heavy oak desk. The impact of her dead weight drove the breath from his lungs. She was freezing. Her skin felt like ice against the warmth of his hands. "Harper," he said. His voice was entirely unrecognizable to him. Low, rough, stripped of its usual calculated smooth edge. Her head lolled against his chest. Her eyes were half closed, the pupils blown wide in the dim light. She blindly fumbled at her pocket, her fingers slipping against the wet fabric. "I brought it," she mumbled, her words slurring together. She pulled out a small silver flash drive, holding it up between two trembling fingers. "The accounts, they're clean. Tell me my brother is clear." Gabriel stared at the drive. The absolute absurdity of it hit him like a physical blow. She was bleeding out on his floor, and she was trying to close a business deal. He batted the drive out of her hand. It clattered uselessly under the desk. "Screw the drive!" Gabriel snarled, sliding one arm under her knees and the other around her back. "Who did this to you?" Harper didn't answer. Her head rolled back over his arm, her eyes rolling up. She was out. Gabriel stood, lifting her off the floor. She weighed nothing. It unnerved him. He was used to the dead weight of men, to the heavy, muscular resistance of a fight. Harper just folded into him, small and broken. He carried her to the massive Chesterfield sofa occupying the center of the room and laid her down. The pale leather immediately began to stain, the rainwater and blood mixing into a muddy rust color. Gabriel didn't care about the sofa. He cared about the pool of red rapidly expanding beneath her right thigh. "Leo!" Gabriel roared, not bothering with the intercom. The door to the outer office burst open. Leo, his second in command, stepped in, a hand already inside his jacket resting on his holster. He took one look at the scene, his boss kneeling over the accountant on a ruined $10,000 couch, and stopped cold. "Lock down the building," Gabriel ordered, not looking up. His hands were already moving, unbuttoning her trench coat with brutal efficiency. "Nobody in, nobody out. Call Clark. Tell him he has 10 minutes to get here or I'll burn his clinic to the ground." "Boss, now, Leo!" Gabriel's voice cracked like a whip. Leo vanished, the door clicking shut behind him. Gabriel peeled the heavy, soaked coat off Harper's shoulders and tossed it onto the floor. Underneath, she wore a simple white blouse and black slacks. The right leg of the slacks was soaked black. He needed to see the wound. He didn't have trauma shears. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his switchblade, and clicked the mechanism. The steel flashed in the lamplight. He grabbed the fabric at her ankle, slipped the blade under the seam, and ripped the pant leg open all the way to her hip. He sucked in a harsh breath. It wasn't a bullet wound. It was a knife, a deep, jagged slice tearing through the meat of her outer thigh. Whoever did it hadn't just stabbed her. They had twisted the blade. It was a messy, angry wound, designed to maximize pain and blood loss. The fact that the femoral artery wasn't severed was purely a matter of luck. A fraction of an inch to the left, and she would have bled out in the elevator. She began to stir, a low groan vibrating in her chest. Gabriel grabbed a stack of clean bar towels from the cabinet near his liquor cart. He balled them up, pressed them directly against the open wound, and leaned his weight into his hands. Harper's eyes flew open. Her back arched off the sofa, a choked guttural scream tearing from her throat. Her hands flew up, her nails digging frantically into Gabriel's wrists, trying to pry his hands away from her leg. "Don't," Gabriel said sharply, leaning harder. "Keep still. You're bleeding out." "Get off!" she gasped, thrashing blindly. The adrenaline of waking up in agony made her wild. Her fist caught him in the jaw, a weak but desperate blow. "Get off me!" Gabriel didn't flinch. He shifted his body, trapping her flailing arms under his elbows while maintaining the brutal pressure on her leg. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "Harper, stop," he commanded, pitching his voice low, injecting every ounce of authority he possessed into those two words. She froze, her chest heaving, staring up at him with wild, terrified eyes. Recognition slowly filtered through the panic. She realized where she was. She realized whose hands were covered in her blood. "Gabriel," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Yeah, it's me." She swallowed hard, her eyes darting frantically around the room before settling back on his face. "It hurts. I know it hurts," he said. He didn't offer empty comforts. He didn't tell her it would be okay. That was a lie you told children. In Gabriel's world, you respected people by telling them the truth. "Someone gutted your leg. I have to keep pressure on it until the doctor gets here. If I let go, you die. Do you understand?" She stared at him for a long moment. The panic in her eyes slowly receded, replaced by that familiar, stubborn wall she always put up when they negotiated. She nodded once, a jerky, tight movement. "Okay," she breathed. She released her death grip on his wrists, letting her hands fall to her sides. She dug her fingers into the leather cushions instead. Gabriel kept his weight on his hands. The blood was soaking through the thick towels, warm and sticky against his palms. He studied her face. The bruise on her cheek was getting darker. Her lip was split. There were defensive lacerations on her forearms, shallow cuts where she had clearly tried to block a blade. She had fought back. "You didn't go to a hospital," Gabriel said, breaking the heavy silence. The rain lashed against the glass behind them. Harper squeezed her eyes shut. A bead of sweat rolled down her temple, mixing with the rainwater. "Hospitals ask questions. Police ask questions. So you dragged yourself across the city to my office." "We had a deal," she muttered. She opened her eyes, fixing him with a glassy, feverish glare. "The drive for my brother's marker. I upheld my end." Gabriel felt a strange, cold tightening in his chest. It was an unfamiliar sensation. He dealt with hardened killers, men who would sell their own mothers for a bigger slice of territory. When they got hurt, they cried. They begged. They made excuses. This woman, an accountant who spent her days looking at spreadsheets, had taken a knife to the leg, dragged herself through a storm, and nearly bled to death on his floor just to make sure a debt was paid. "You're a fool, Harper," he said quietly. A ghost of a smile touched her split lip. "I'm a professional, Rossi. I don't miss deadlines." She faded again, her eyes slipping shut, her head turning to the side. Gabriel adjusted his grip, pressing down harder, ignoring the ache in his own shoulders. He stared at her pale throat, watching the faint, rapid pulse jumping under her skin. He had spent his whole life building walls, insulating himself from the collateral damage of his industry. People were assets or liabilities. Harper Quinn was supposed to be a temporary asset, but looking at her now, broken on his couch, Gabriel felt the walls cracking. He didn't just want to fix her. He wanted to unmake the person who had done this. Dr. Clark arrived in 8 minutes. He was a small, balding man who smelled permanently of iodine and stale cigarettes. He didn't ask questions. You didn't survive a decade on Gabriel Rossi's payroll by being curious. Clark walked into the room, took one look at the blood-soaked towels, and immediately opened his black bag. "How long?" Clark asked, snapping on latex gloves. 20 minutes since she walked in, Gabriel said. He didn't move his hands from her leg until Clark was in position with clamps and gauze. "Let me in, boss," Clark muttered. Gabriel stepped back, but he didn't leave the room. He walked over to the liquor cart, poured a fresh glass of bourbon, and turned to watch. Clark was fast. He numbed the area with a series of quick injections, but the local anesthetic could only do so much against the deep muscle trauma. When Clark began digging in the wound to clamp a bleeder, Harper jolted awake. She didn't scream this time. She just sucked in a sharp, hissing breath, her teeth grinding together so hard Gabriel could hear it across the room. She grabbed the edge of the sofa, her knuckles turning white. Gabriel set his glass down. He walked back over and sat on the coffee table beside the sofa. He didn't say anything. He just took his left hand and placed it firmly over hers, pinning her grip to the leather. Harper opened her eyes, looking at his hand covering hers. She didn't pull away. She squeezed his fingers, her nails biting into his skin as Clark worked. Gabriel let her. He felt the tremors racking her small frame, the involuntary muscle spasms as the needle pushed through her skin, tying off the damage. "It's messy," Clark noted casually, his eyes magnified behind surgical loops. Serrated blade, twisted on the pullout, pure intimidation work. Whoever did this wasn't trying to kill you, sweetheart. They were trying to send a message. Harper flinched, turning her face away. Gabriel's eyes darkened. A message. It took 45 minutes to close the wound. By the time Clark taped the final thick white dressing over her thigh, Harper was soaked in a fresh layer of cold sweat. She looked entirely drained, a hollow shell of the sharp-tongued woman who usually argued with Gabriel over decimal points. "She needs antibiotics. Broad spectrum," Clark said, packing his bloody instruments into a biohazard bag. "I'll leave a script, but I have some in the car. I'll bring them up. Keep her off that leg for at least 2 weeks. If she tears those internal stitches, she's back to square one. And next time, I might not be able to save the muscle." "Understood," Gabriel said. Clark paused at the door, looking back at Gabriel. "She shouldn't be moved tonight, boss. The shock alone." "She stays here," Gabriel cut him off. Clark nodded once and slipped out the door. The silence rushed back into the room, heavy and thick. The the storm outside had died down to a steady, rhythmic drizzle. The only sound was Harper's shallow breathing. Gabriel walked to his desk. He picked up the silver flash drive from the floor, wiped a smudge of blood off the casing with his thumb, and set it next to his keyboard. Then, he walked back to the sofa and pulled up a heavy armchair. Sitting directly in her line of sight, Harper watched him through half-open eyes. She looked exhausted, but the defensive guard was slowly creeping back over her features. She tried to adjust her shirt, awkwardly pulling the damp fabric up to cover her collarbone, suddenly hyper-aware of her state of undress. "Stop moving," Gabriel said. He grabbed a cashmere throw blanket from the back of his chair and tossed it over her, covering her from the waist down. "Thank you," she muttered. Gabriel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, clasping his hands together. He looked at her, really looked at her. "Clark is right," Gabriel said softly. "It was an intimidation hit. A professional wouldn't have missed the artery unless they wanted to. They wanted you to hurt, and they wanted you to walk away to tell someone about it." Harper swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to the floor. "It doesn't matter. I brought the drive. We're square." "It matters to me." She looked up, surprised by the flat, deadly conviction in his tone. "Why? Because I'm your accountant?" "Because you were bled on my floor," Gabriel replied, his voice dangerously quiet. "Because you are under my roof. And because you are sitting on a debt that I just bought, which means, by extension, you belong to my house right now. No one touches what belongs to my house." Harper let out a dry, bitter laugh that ended in a wince. "God, you sound exactly like a mob boss right now." "I am a mob boss, Harper." "I know," she closed her eyes. "I know what you are, Rossi. I knew what I was getting into when I came to you." "Did you?" Gabriel tilted his head. "Because from where I'm sitting, you look like a woman who thought she could play in the deep end and just realized there are sharks in the water." "I didn't have a choice," she snapped, a sudden spark of anger lighting up her exhausted face. She tried to push herself up on her elbows, but groaned and fell back. "My brother is an idiot. He owes the Russo family. Do you know what they do to people who default? They don't send collection letters. They take fingers. They take lives." "I know what the Russos do," Gabriel said coldly. "What I don't know is why one of their soldiers put a knife in your leg tonight." Harper went perfectly still. The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Gabriel pieced it together. The math was simple, really. He just hadn't wanted to look at the equation. "They didn't come after your brother," Gabriel stated, watching her face pale even further. "They came after you." She didn't answer. "Why?" Gabriel pressed. When she kept her mouth shut, he stood up, looming over the sofa. "Why did Russo's men corner you, Harper? You told me no one knew you were fixing my books. You said your tracks were covered." "They were," she whispered. "But they didn't care about your books." Gabriel frowned. "Then what?" Harper took a shaky breath. "Russo. He found out I was the one auditing the city's pension fund, the same fund his construction companies have been draining for 5 years. She looked away, staring at the rain against the glass. "They caught me in the parking garage after work. They told me to drop the audit, to sign off on the discrepancies. They told me if I went to the police, my brother was dead." Gabriel felt a cold fury settle in his bones, freezing the marrow. "They stabbed you to make you drop a legal audit," Gabriel clarified. "Yes. And instead of going to the police or giving in to them, you dragged yourself here to give me a flash drive. I needed the money, she said, her voice breaking for the first time. A single tear escaped, cutting a clean track through the dried blood and grime on her cheek. I needed you to buy out his debt. If you bought his debt, Russo couldn't use him against me anymore. He'd belong to you. He'd be safe. She had taken a knife to the leg, refused to bend to a rival syndicate, and used the Mafia to outmaneuver the Mafia, all to protect a brother who didn't deserve her. Gabriel stared at the woman on his sofa. He had spent his life surrounded by men who claimed to know the meaning of loyalty. But looking at Harper Quinn, clutching a bloody cashmere blanket, Gabriel realized most of his men didn't know a damn thing about it. He reached out, his thumb gently catching the tear on her bruised cheek, wiping it away. The touch was startlingly intimate. Harper's breath hitched, her eyes widening as she looked up into his dark, unreadable face. Your brother's debt is cleared, Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a low, rough murmur. He's safe. And Russo? She asked hesitantly. Gabriel stood up, walking toward his desk. He picked up his encrypted phone. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch and cling to him. When he looked back at her, the cynical, calculated businessman was gone. The monster she had come to bargain with was fully awake. Get some sleep, Harper, Gabriel said, dialing a number. By the time you wake up, Russo's crew will no longer be a problem. Harper woke to the smell of strong coffee and antiseptic. She didn't open her eyes immediately. She took stock of her body. Her mouth tasted like copper and old pennies. Her head throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache. And her right leg felt as though it had been encased in wet concrete and set on fire. The memory of the parking garage, the cold steel, the blinding rain, and Gabriel Rossi's ruined leather sofa crashed over her in a fragmented wave. She opened her eyes. She was no longer in the office. The ceiling was a dark, vaulted gray. She lay in a massive bed with charcoal sheets, the mattress firm and unyielding beneath her. A muted television played a news channel in the corner, the volume turned down to a mere whisper. Her ruined slacks and bloody blouse were gone, replaced by a soft, oversized gray t-shirt that smelled faintly of cedar and expensive fabric softener. Harper tried to sit up. The muscles in her core protested, and a sharp warning spike of agony shot up from her thigh. She gasped, falling back against the pillows. Don't push it. The voice came from the shadows near the window. Gabriel sat in a low armchair, a tablet resting on his knee. He wore a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and dark trousers. He looked entirely undisturbed, a stark contrast to the violence of the previous night. Where am I? Harper asked. Her voice cracked. My private suite, 2 floors up from the office, Gabriel replied, setting the tablet on a side table. He stood and walked over, handing her a glass of ice water and 2 white pills. Clark said to take these the moment you woke up. They'll keep the infection out and take the edge off. Harper took the pills with a trembling hand, swallowing them down with a desperate gulp of water. She handed the glass back. What time is it? 11 in the morning. Panic spiked in her chest. She grabbed the edge of the blanket. I have to get to work. If I don't show up, they'll ask questions. The pension audit is handled, Gabriel interrupted smoothly. Harper froze. What do you mean, handled? Gabriel walked to the foot of the bed. his dark eyes locking onto hers. "I mean, you had a severe allergic reaction to a prescribed medication last night. Your throat swelled up. You are currently in the ICU at St. Jude's. Your firm has been notified, and they have granted you a 2-week medical leave. The hospital records corroborate this. If the police or your employers check, they will find a very convincing paper trail." Harper stared at him, her mind spinning. "You hacked a hospital?" "I own the hospital administrator," Gabriel corrected mildly. "It's cleaner than hacking." She sank back into the pillows, the fight suddenly draining out of her. The sheer scale of his reach was suffocating. She was an accountant. She balanced ledgers. She didn't deal with manufactured hospital records or men who could erase 2 weeks of her life with a phone call. "And Russo?" she asked, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. Gabriel's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy silver money clip. It was tarnished, shaped like a bulldog. He tossed it onto the mattress next to her hip. Harper recognized it instantly. It belonged to the man in the parking garage. The man who had held her against the concrete while the other one used the knife. "They won't be visiting you again," Gabriel said flatly. "Or anyone else, for that matter." Harper stared at the silver bulldog. Her stomach churned. She was a civilian. She knew what Gabriel Rossi did for a living, but knowing the numbers on a spreadsheet was entirely different from seeing the physical proof of a murder resting on her bedsheets. "You killed them," she whispered. "I eliminated a liability," Gabriel corrected, his tone devoid of any emotion. "They attacked a civilian working under my protection. If I let that slide, I look weak. If I look weak, I lose my city. It wasn't a personal favor to you, Harper. It was maintenance." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Mob bosses didn't personally sit by a civilian's bed for 12 hours just for maintenance. But Harper didn't push it. She looked away from the money clip, staring at the muted television. "Thank you," she said quietly to the screen. Gabriel didn't reply. He picked up the money clip, slipped it back into his pocket, and walked toward the door. "Leo will bring you some food. Eat it. Don't try to walk. You belong to me until that leg heals, Quinn. Try not to make my investment a waste of time." The door clicked shut. Harper was alone in the quiet room, the phantom pain in her leg burning a steady, brutal reminder of exactly whose world she had just stepped into. By day 4, the quiet was driving Harper insane. She was a woman built on momentum. Since her parents died, she had survived by constantly moving forward. College, CPA exams, grueling 80-hour weeks at the firm, and managing the endless, exhausting wreckage of her brother's bad decisions. She didn't know how to exist in a vacuum. Gabriel's suite was a gilded cage. It was immaculate, silent, and entirely cut off from the chaos of Chicago. Leo brought her 3 meals a day. Dr. Clark visited every evening to change her dressings. Gabriel, however, was a ghost. She saw him only in passing. A shadow in the hallway, a low voice on a phone call in the adjacent study. On the evening of the 4th day, Harper had enough. Using the heavy oak crutches Clark had grudgingly provided, she leveraged herself out of bed. The pain in her thigh was a sharp, tearing sensation, but it was manageable. She ground her teeth, swung her good leg forward, and began the slow, agonizing trek out of the bedroom. She found Gabriel in the massive, open-plan kitchen. He was standing at the marble island, reviewing a stack of physical documents under the warm glow of pendant lights. A half-empty glass of scotch sat near his elbow. He was out of his suit jacket, wearing a black button-down with the collar unfastened. He didn't look up as the rubber tips of her crutches squeaked against the hardwood floor. Clark said, "Bed-dressed, Harper." "Clark is a quack who smells like an ashtray," Harper shot back, stopping a few feet from the island. She was breathing heavily, a fine sheen of sweat coating her forehead just from the effort of walking 50 feet. "I need my laptop." Gabriel turned a page. "No." "I have quarterly reports due," she insisted, shifting her weight awkwardly. Her hands dug into the grips of the crutches. "I have emails. I can't just vanish into a void. It's suspicious. You are in a medically induced coma at St. Jude's. Comatose patients generally do not answer emails." Gabriel finally looked up. His dark eyes scanned her pale face, dropping to her trembling right leg, then back up. "Go back to bed." "I am losing my mind in that room," Harper said, her voice rising. The frustration of the last 4 days suddenly boiled over. "I am not one of your soldiers, Rossi. You can't just lock me in a box and expect me to sit still. I need to work. I need to do something." Gabriel set his pen down. He walked around the island, closing the distance between them. Harper instinctively stiffened, but she held her ground, lifting her chin to meet his gaze. "You think this is a punishment?" Gabriel asked, his voice low. "I think it's a hostage situation." "If you were a hostage, you'd be in a basement, not sleeping on Egyptian cotton," Gabriel retorted. He stopped a foot away from her. "You almost bled out on my floor 4 nights ago. Your muscle tissue is barely stitched together. You want to work? Fine. Stand there for 5 minutes without those crutches. If you can do it, I'll hand you your laptop right now." Harper glared at him. It was a stupid, petty challenge, and she was exactly stubborn enough to take it. She braced her core, shifted her weight entirely onto her left leg, and slowly moved her arms away from the crutches. The crutches clattered loudly to the floor. For 3 seconds, she was fine. Then, the inevitable fatigue in her good leg caused her to shift her balance. A fraction of her body weight transferred to her right thigh. The pain wasn't a spark this time. It was a detonation. Her injured muscle buckled instantly, refusing to hold her. Harper gasped as the floor rushed up to meet her. But she never hit the wood. Gabriel's arms wrapped around her waist, catching her mid-fall. He absorbed her weight effortlessly, pulling her flush against his chest. The sudden movement sent a jolt of agony through her leg, and a strangled sob ripped from her throat before she could swallow it down. She squeezed her eyes shut, burying her face into his shirt, her fingers curling desperately into the dark fabric. They stood there in the quiet kitchen. Harper was trembling violently, humiliated by her own weakness, waiting for him to gloat, waiting for the "I told you so." It never came. Instead, Gabriel simply held her. One of his large hands rested flat against her lower back, a heavy, solid anchor. He didn't speak. He just let her ride out the wave of pain. The steady thumping of his heart beneath her cheek was the only sound in the room. "You don't have to fight everything, Harper," Gabriel said quietly, his voice vibrating in his chest. "Sometimes you're just broken, and that has to be okay." Harper opened her eyes. The scent of his cologne, bergamot, and smoke was overwhelming. She had spent her entire adult life playing defense, bracing for the next disaster, the next debt, the next crisis. No one had ever told her it was okay to stop fighting. She slowly uncurled her fingers from his shirt. Gabriel eased her back, keeping a firm grip on her arms to ensure she was steady on her good leg before he bent down and retrieved her crutches. He handed them back to her. "Sit at the island," he ordered softly, returning to his cold, authoritative baseline. But the edge was gone. "I'll have Leo bring your laptop, but if I see you working on anything other than the Russo Syndicate's offshore accounts, I'm throwing the machine out the window." Harper tucked the crutches under her arms. A small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time in a week. Deal. 2 days later, the outside world finally breached the walls. Harper was sitting at the massive dining table, surrounded by paper files and empty coffee cups. She had spent the last 48 hours systematically dismantling the Russo family's financial network. It was brilliant, methodical work. Gabriel had watched her trace shell companies with the ruthlessness of an apex predator. She was a sniper with a spreadsheet. Gabriel was sitting across from her, cleaning a matte black Sig Sauer. The metallic snick-clack of the slide was a rhythmic background noise that Harper had surprisingly grown used to. Then her burner phone buzzed. It was the cheap plastic phone Gabriel had provided her for absolute emergencies. Only one person had the number. Harper flinched at the sound. She stared at the vibrating plastic on the table as if it were a live grenade. Gabriel stopped moving, his eyes flicking from the gun to the phone, and then to her face. She picked it up and hit accept. "Toby?" Gabriel resumed cleaning his gun, but his posture was suddenly rigid. "Harps, thank God!" A frantic, thin voice bled through the receiver. It was loud enough in the quiet room that Gabriel could hear every word. "Listen, I need a favor. A big one." Harper closed her eyes. The familiar exhaustion washed over her. "Toby, I can't right now. I'm out of town. Work thing." Yeah, whatever." Toby dismissed her immediately. "Look, the Russos backed off. I don't know why, but they tore up my marker. It's a miracle. But I got a tip on a horse at Arlington today. Guaranteed payout, Harps. I just need $5,000 to put down. I'll pay you back double by tonight." Harper's grip on the phone tightened until her knuckles turned white. She had taken a serrated blade to the thigh. She had dragged herself bleeding through the rain. She had sold her soul to a mob boss to wipe his slate clean. And less than a week later, he was asking for cash to put on a horse. "No, Toby," Harper said, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't have it." "Come on, Harps, don't hold out on me. You're an accountant, you swim in cash. Just front me the 5. I owe a guy a few hundred anyway. I need to clear it before things get messy again." "I said no," Harper's voice cracked. "You don't understand what it took to get you out of the last one. Just stop. Please, Toby, just stop." "You know what? You're useless," Toby snapped, turning vicious the second he was denied. "Mom always said you were tight-fisted. Don't bother calling me when you get back." The line went dead. Harper slowly lowered the phone. She stared blindly at her laptop screen, the cursor blinking rhythmically. She didn't cry. She just looked incredibly hollow, like a building that had been completely gutted by a fire, leaving only the facade standing. Gabriel set the slide of the gun down on the table. The heavy metal clunk made Harper jump. He didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her with a cold, calculated fury that made her breath catch. "He doesn't know," Gabriel stated. It wasn't a question. Harper shook her head slightly, keeping her eyes fixed on the keyboard. "No, and he never will. If he knew I went to you, he'd just try to use it. He'd think he had Mafia protection. He's a parasite, Harper. He's my brother, she fired back. But there was no heat in it. It was an automated defense mechanism, spoken purely out of habit. Loyalty is a virtue, Gabriel said, leaning forward, resting his forearms on the table. Blind loyalty is a disease. It rots you from the inside out. You almost died for a man who didn't even ask if you were okay, who called you just to demand more of your blood to gamble away. I didn't have a choice, Harper yelled, finally looking at him. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears of pure anger. He's the only family I have left. I promised my mother I would look out for him. What was I supposed to do? Let the Russos kill him? Yes, Gabriel said softly. The single word hit the room like a physical blow. Harper stared at him, stunned into silence. You let the weak call themselves, Harper, Gabriel continued, his voice dark and utterly pragmatic. You don't throw yourself onto the tracks to stop a train that wants to crash. You saved him this time. What about next month? What about next year? How many times are you going to let him bleed you dry before you realize you're the one holding the knife? Harper opened her mouth to argue, but the words died in her throat. She looked at her bandaged leg beneath the table. She looked at the offshore accounts on her screen. She looked at the mob boss sitting across from her, speaking a terrible, brutal truth she had been running from for 10 years. Gabriel stood up. He picked up his reassembled gun and slid it into the holster at the small of his back. I bought his debt, which means I wiped his slate clean with Russo, Gabriel said, walking toward the door. He paused, looking back at her over his shoulder. But he just admitted he's taking on new debt. He's stepping back into the game. And that makes him a liability to you. And you, Harper, are currently an asset to me. Harper felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Gabriel, what are you doing? I'm fixing your ledger, Gabriel said, his hand resting on the doorknob. You don't know how to cut your losses, Quinn? So, I'm going to do it for you. He opened the door and stepped out, leaving Harper alone in the deafening silence. Harper stared at the closed mahogany door. Gabriel's words hung in the air, a toxic gas rapidly filling the room. I'm fixing your ledger. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the dull ache in her thigh. She knew Gabriel. She had read his ledgers. She had seen the columns where human lives were converted into business expenses and written off. If Gabriel viewed her brother as a liability to a protected asset, Toby was already dead. She grabbed her crutches, ignoring the scream of her torn muscle, and practically threw herself toward the door. She yanked it open, hobbling into the hallway. Gabriel, she yelled. The corridor was empty. He was already in the private elevator at the far end, the polished steel doors sliding shut, sealing him inside. Harper leaned heavily against the wall, her chest heaving. She couldn't chase him. She couldn't physically fight him. But she wasn't powerless. Gabriel Rossi had brought a forensic accountant into his inner sanctum and given her unrestricted access to a rival syndicate's network. He had forgotten the cardinal rule of his own business. You don't give a desperate person a loaded weapon. She turned back to the dining table, dropping her crutches. She practically fell into the chair, pulling the laptop closer. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She didn't try to hack Gabriel's phone. She wasn't a spy. She was a numbers girl. And right now, Gabriel needed the Russo syndicate's offshore accounts drained and redirected into his own dummy corporations to complete his hostile takeover. It was a massive, delicate operation, a multi-million-dollar transfer that required precision, timing, and her specific routing codes. She found the master transfer file she had spent the last 2 days building. With a few keystrokes, she encrypted the routing numbers, locking the destination accounts behind a dual authentication firewall. Then, she tied the decryption key to a dead man's switch on her own burner phone. She picked up the plastic phone and dialed Gabriel's primary number. He answered on the second ring. "Go back to bed, Harper." His voice was the calm hum of an idling engine. "If you touch him, I burn the money," Harper said. Her voice didn't shake. The panic had crystallized into absolute icy focus, silence on the other end. "I just locked down the Russo transfers," Harper continued, staring at the flashing red prompt on her screen. $84 million across 12 shell companies. If you kill my brother, I will corrupt the routing codes. The money won't go to you. It will bounce directly back to the Federal Reserve, flagging every single account connected to it. I will burn Russo, and I will burn you right alongside him." The silence stretched. Harper could hear the faint, rhythmic sound of tires on wet pavement through the receiver. He was in his car. "You are bluffing," Gabriel stated, but the absolute certainty was gone from his tone. "Try me." Harper leaned closer to the phone. "I bled for you, Rossi. I fixed your books. I gave you your rival's empire on a silver platter. But Toby is mine. You do not get to balance my books." Gabriel let out a slow, measured breath. "He is a cancer, Harper. He will drag you under." "Then I drown," she snapped. "But it's my choice, not yours. Call off your men. Turn the car around." "I don't have men on this. I'm handling it myself." Harper's stomach dropped. The thought of Gabriel standing over Toby with that cold, dead look in his eyes made her nauseous. "Gabriel, please." "I am 3 blocks from the Arlington track, Harper. I am going to have a conversation with your brother. Keep your finger on the trigger if it makes you feel better. But I suggest you wait until I'm finished before you blow up my operation." The line clicked dead. Harper sat frozen, the burner phone pressed so hard against her ear, it hurt. The red prompt on her screen blinked in the dimming light of the room. Awaiting decryption key. 10 miles away, Gabriel stepped out of his black SUV into the muddy parking lot of the Arlington racetrack. The afternoon air smelled of wet earth, cheap beer, and desperation. He didn't blend in. In his tailored dark suit and wool overcoat, he looked exactly like what he was, a reaper walking through a field of dying crops. He spotted Toby near the chain-link fence by the betting windows. Toby looked exactly like his file photos, thin, nervous, vibrating with the manic energy of a junkie looking for a fix. He was clutching a crumpled racing form, arguing with a large man in a cheap leather jacket. Gabriel approached smoothly, a shadow slipping through the crowd. He didn't announce himself. He simply reached out, grabbed Toby by the back of the neck, and slammed him face first into the chain-link fence. The large man in the leather jacket stepped back, raising his hands in instant surrender, recognizing the silent, lethal authority radiating from Gabriel. He turned and practically ran. "Hey, what the hell?" Toby shrieked, his face mashed against the cold metal wire. He struggled, but Gabriel's grip was like an iron vice, pinning him effortlessly. Gabriel leaned in close, his mouth inches from Toby's ear. "My name is Gabriel Rossi," he said, keeping his voice conversational. Toby froze completely. The fight left his body in a rush, replaced by a violent, full-body tremor. Every degenerate gambler in Chicago knew the name Rossi. "Please," Toby whimpered, his voice cracking. "I don't owe you anything. I swear. The Russos are dead," Gabriel interrupted softly. "I bought your debt, which means I bought you. And frankly, Tobias, I am suffering from extreme buyer's remorse." Gabriel yanked him backward, spinning him around, and shoved him hard against the fence. Toby stumbled, his eyes wide and terrified, staring at the mob boss. I can get the money," Toby stammered, holding his hands up. "Just give me a week. This horse today, it's a sure thing." Gabriel moved so fast, Toby didn't even blink. He drew the Sig Sauer from his waistband and pressed the hot muzzle directly under Toby's chin, forcing his head back. Toby whimpered, tears instantly spilling over his cheeks. "Shut up," Gabriel commanded. The absolute lack of anger in his voice was the most terrifying part. It was purely transactional. "You don't have a week. You don't have a minute. You are a parasite, sucking the life out of the only good thing in your miserable existence." "I'm sorry," Toby sobbed. "I'm sorry." "Do you know where your sister is right now?" Gabriel asked, pressing the barrel slightly harder into the soft flesh of Toby's throat. Toby shook his head frantically. "She is sitting in my penthouse, recovering from a serrated hunting knife that one of Russo's men drove through her leg." Toby's eyes widened in genuine shock. "What? No! Harper, she took a blade for you," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "She sold herself to my syndicate to buy your pathetic life. And you called her to ask for $5,000 to put on a horse." Gabriel saw the exact moment the reality of it shattered Toby's selfish, insulated little world. The kid actually looked sick. The color drained from his face, leaving him a splotchy, pale gray. "I didn't know," Toby breathed. "I swear to God, I didn't know." "Ignorance isn't an excuse, it's a symptom." Gabriel slowly lowered the gun, stepping back, but the suffocating pressure of his presence remained. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope, tossing it onto the muddy ground at Toby's feet. "There is $50,000 in cash in that envelope," Gabriel said flatly, "and a fake passport, and a one-way ticket to Dublin leaving out of O'Hare in exactly 3 hours. Toby stared at the envelope, confused, trembling. "What is this?" "This is your severance package," Gabriel told him. "You are going to pick it up. You are going to get in a cab. You are going to get on that plane. If you ever contact your sister again, if you ever ask her for a dime, or if I ever see your face in this city." Gabriel paused, letting the silence do the heavy lifting. "I won't stab you in the leg, Tobias. I will skin you alive and mail the pieces to her in a shoebox. Do we have an understanding?" Toby looked at the gun in Gabriel's hand, then at the envelope in the mud. He nodded frantically, his breathing shallow and rapid. Yes, I understand. I'm gone. Pick it up." Toby scrambled to his knees in the mud, clutching the envelope to his chest like a shield. He didn't look back as he scrambled to his feet and ran toward the taxi stand. Gabriel watched him go, feeling a strange, dark satisfaction settle in his chest. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed the burner number. Harper answered instantly. "Gabriel." "He's on his way to the airport," Gabriel said simply. "He has money and a new name. He won't bother you again." A long, shuddering exhale echoed through the phone. It was the sound of a woman dropping a weight she had been carrying for a decade. You didn't hurt him? She asked, her voice thick. I hurt his pride, Gabriel replied, turning back toward his SUV. And I terrified him, but he's breathing. The parasite has been removed, Harper. The host can heal now. He heard the sharp intake of her breath, then the rhythmic tapping of keys. The funds are unlocked, Harper said quietly. 84 million is currently routing into your holding accounts. The transfer is clean. Thank you. Gabriel? He paused with his hand on the door handle. Yes. Thank you. Gabriel didn't reply. He ended the call, sliding into the leather driver's seat. For the first time in his life, he had compromised his authority, negotiated with a civilian, and let a liability walk away. And he didn't regret a single second of it. 2 weeks later, the rain finally stopped. Chicago emerged into a crisp, bright autumn. Inside Gabriel's suite, the atmosphere had shifted into something quiet and deeply domestic, an illusion that both of them were carefully maintaining. Harper was walking. She used a sleek carbon fiber cane Gabriel had procured, discarding the clumsy oak crutches. The limp was pronounced, a permanent hitch in her step, but the wound was closed. The stitches had been removed by a remarkably silent Dr. Clark 3 days prior, leaving a jagged, angry pink scar down her thigh. It was a scar she earned. She touched it sometimes when she thought she was alone, tracing the raised flesh, reminding herself that it was real. The Russo syndicate was gone. It didn't end in a dramatic mob war in the streets. It ended in boardrooms and federal courts. Harper's meticulous dismantling of their offshore accounts had triggered a massive IRS and FBI raid. The family was financially gutted, their assets frozen, their capos indicted. Gabriel simply walked into the vacuum and took the territory without firing a single shot. He was the undisputed king of the city, and a forensic accountant had handed him the crown. Harper stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, leaning on her cane, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled. She wore her own clothes again, a tailored navy suit she had asked Leo to retrieve from her apartment. Her bag was packed, sitting by the door. Her 2-week medical leave was over. St. Jude's Hospital had officially discharged their comatose patient. Tomorrow morning she was supposed to walk back into her firm, sit at her cubicle, and audit municipal tax returns. The thought made her want to scream. The heavy oak doors clicked open. Gabriel walked in. He stopped a few feet inside the room, his eyes immediately locking onto the packed duffel bag by the entrance. His jaw tightened, a microscopic shift that Harper caught only because she had spent the last 3 weeks studying him. "Your car is waiting downstairs," Gabriel said. His voice was perfectly neutral, betraying nothing. Harper turned away from the window. "Thank you." He walked over to the kitchen island, picking up a thick manila envelope. He held it out to her. Harper crossed the room, the rubber tip of her cane tapping against the hardwood. She didn't take the envelope immediately. She looked at him. He was guarded, the impenetrable walls of the Mafia boss firmly back in place. "What is it?" she asked. "Your severance," Gabriel replied smoothly. $250,000. Clean, washed cash, a new passport, and a deed to a condo in Vancouver, fully paid off. Harper stared at the envelope. It was an exit, a golden parachute. "Why?" she asked, keeping her hands on her cane. "Because you did the job. You exceeded the terms of our arrangement," Gabrielle said, looking her directly in the eye. "You broke Russo. You doubled my liquid assets. This is standard compensation for a consultant of your caliber, And the passport? The condo? Gabriel looked away, a muscle ticking in his jaw. Toby is gone. You don't have anything tying you to this city anymore. If you stay, you go back to a firm that doesn't respect you, living a life that bores you. I'm giving you a way out. A fresh ledger. Harper finally reached out and took the envelope. It was heavy. She looked at Gabriel, the cynical, calculated man who had watched her bleed on his floor. The man who had held her when her legs gave out. The man who had terrified her brother into exile just to save her from herself. She realized then what the envelope really was. It wasn't a reward. It was a test. He wanted to know if she was a civilian who had survived the dark, or if she was something else entirely. You're right, Harper said softly. I don't have anything tying me here. Gabriel's eyes darkened, a flash of genuine regret passing through them before he locked it away. Leo will take you wherever you want to go, the airport or your apartment. Goodbye, Gabriel. Harper turned, picked up her duffel bag, and walked out the door. She didn't look back. She heard the heavy mahogany door click shut behind her, sealing him away. The civilian world was deafening. Harper sat in her apartment for 3 days. The silence here wasn't the insulated, expensive quiet of Gabriel's suite. It was the hollow, echoing quiet of an empty life. She watched the news. She watched pundits speculate on the sudden, mysterious collapse of the Russo crime family. She watched the mayor take credit for a cleanup he had nothing to do with. She looked at her laptop. She had logged into her firm's portal once, stared at a standard quarterly audit for 10 minutes, and closed it. It was like reading a children's book after studying advanced calculus. She looked at the manila envelope sitting unopened on her cheap coffee table. Vancouver, 250 grand. Peace. She picked up the envelope, walked into her tiny kitchen, and dropped it into the trash can. Gabriel was wrong about one thing. She didn't want a fresh ledger. She wanted the one she had already balanced. It was 9 p.m. on a Thursday when she stepped out of the cab in front of the Rossi building. It wasn't raining this time. The air was crisp, the city vibrating with aggressive energy. She walked past the heavy security doors. The guards, who all knew exactly who she was by now, didn't stop her. They stepped aside, their eyes dropping respectfully as she passed. Harper took the private elevator. The familiar hum of the machinery felt like a welcoming embrace. She stepped out into the plush, dimly lit corridor leading to his office. She didn't knock. She pushed the heavy mahogany doors open. The hinges were silent. Gabriel was sitting at his desk. He looked terrible. There were dark circles under his eyes. His tie was discarded, and a half-empty bottle of bourbon sat next to a stack of unread files. He looked like a man who had won a war, but lost his mind in the process. He looked up sharply at the sound of the door. When he saw her standing there, leaning on her cane, wearing a sharp black trench coat, he froze entirely. For a split second, the ruthless Mafia boss vanished, replaced by a man staring at a ghost. Harper walked into the room. She didn't lean against the door frame. She didn't whisper apologies. She walked with deliberate, heavy steps, the cane clicking assertively on the polished hardwood floor, tracking perfectly straight toward his desk. She stopped right in front of him. Gabriel slowly stood up, bracing his hands on the desk. He searched her face, looking for the terrified accountant. She wasn't there. "You're late," Gabriel managed, his voice a low, rough rumble that vibrated through the quiet room. A slow, sharp smile spread across Harper's face. It wasn't the tentative, scared smile she had offered weeks ago. It was the smile of a predator recognizing another. "I'm right on time," Harper corrected, resting both hands on the silver head of her cane. "I threw your envelope in the trash, Rossi. Vancouver is too cold." Gabriel stared at her, the tension in his shoulders slowly unraveling. A dangerous magnetic energy flooded the space between them. "Then what are you doing here, Harper?" he asked softly. "I came to renegotiate," she stated, locking eyes with him. "You need a CFO. Your current money laundering infrastructure is sloppy, your dummy corporations are vulnerable to federal audits, and frankly, your offshore routing is pedestrian." Gabriel let out a short, breathless laugh. It was a sound of pure disbelief. "You want to work for me?" "I want to partner with you," Harper corrected, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I don't belong in a cubicle. I belong in the deep end. You showed me the sharks, Gabriel, and I realized something." "What's that?" Gabriel asked, leaning closer across the desk, completely captivated by the fire in her eyes. Harper leaned in to meet him, her gaze dropping to his lips before rising back to his eyes. "I'm a shark too." Gabriel looked at the woman standing before him. She was scarred, cynical, and utterly brilliant. She had walked through the fire of his world and emerged hardened steel. He had spent his life building an empire, trusting no one, ruling through fear. But looking at Harper Quinn, he knew the rules had irrevocably changed. He reached out, his hand wrapping around the back of her neck, pulling her the rest of the way across the desk. "Welcome to the firm, Ms. Quinn," he murmured, right before he kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It tasted like bourbon, survival, and the absolute certainty that the city of Chicago would never be the same again. If you felt the tension and loved the dark, dangerous chemistry between Harper and Gabriel, don't let the story end here. Hit that like button to show your support, and share this video with your friends who can't resist a gritty, slow-burn Mafia romance. Want more original stories where the heroine doesn't just survive the underworld, but takes it over? Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss a new upload. Drop a comment below. Did Harper make the right choice throwing away the money? Let's talk about it.